He said he was working late to secure our future, but when I found him in that rooftop lounge, he wasn't alone. I heard him laughing, telling his mistress I had the personality of a blank page. Julian thought I was just a sweet girl who would be lost without him. He didn't realize I was the ghost who built every inch of his empire. Every genius acquisition he ever made, that was me. He spent months hunting the shadow that was dismantling his firm. Julian, look at me. I'm the woman who just bought your company. And I'm not here with your lunch. I'm here with your termination papers. If you've ever been underestimated, you'll want to see how I deleted his legacy. The penthouse was silent, save for the soft hum of Elara's laptop and the distant siren of a Chicago police cruiser 20 stories below. It was 11 p.m. On the mahogany desk sat a half-eaten salad and a stack of complex financial spreadsheets that Julian had struggled to understand earlier that morning. Elara's fingers flew across the keys. She wasn't just checking math, she was rewriting the entire acquisition strategy for Vance Global. To the world, Julian Vance was the visionary genius. To Elara, he was a man who couldn't balance a risk assessment profile without her guiding hand. She finished the final line of code, her eyes stinging from the blue light. She had been retired for 3 years, a choice Julian insisted was for her own well-being. "The corporate world is a shark tank, Elara," he had told her. "Let me handle the sharks. You stay here in our beautiful life." Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Julian. "Stuck at the office. The Apex merger is falling apart. Don't wait up. Late night ahead." Elara sighed. Her gaze drifted to the kitchen island. Julian's daily medication sat by his coffee mug. He had been complaining of chest tightness all week, a side effect of the high-octane stress he thrived on. If he was going to pull an all-nighter, he needed those pills. She grabbed her trench coat and the small orange bottle. The drive to the Vance Global headquarters was a blur of city lights. The lobby was empty, the security guard nodding respectfully as she bypassed the scanners. Elara headed for the executive elevators, her heart fluttering with a strange, heavy intuition. When she reached the top floor, the main boardroom was dark. The glass-walled offices were empty. A faint sound of laughter drifted from the floor above, the private rooftop lounge reserved for the C-suite. Elara climbed the stairs quietly. Through the cracked heavy door, the scent of expensive bourbon and Chloe's jasmine perfume hit her first. Julian was leaning against the marble bar, a drink in one hand and the other resting casually on Chloe's waist. Chloe, the head of marketing, was laughing at something he had just whispered. "You're a genius, Julian," Chloe cooed, clinking her glass against his. "The way you handled the board today, how do you come up with these strategies? It's like you see the numbers before they even exist." Julian smirked, that familiar, arrogant tilt of his head that Elara used to find charming. "It's a gift, Chloe. Some people are born to lead, and others are born to watch." "And Elara?" Chloe asked, her voice dropping to a playful kurr. "Doesn't she mind you being gone every night?" Julian laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that made the air in Elara's lungs vanish. "Elara," he said, "she's a sweet girl, but she has the personality of a blank page. She spends her days looking at Pinterest and waiting for me to come home. She's lucky I haven't replaced her with someone who actually understands the world I live in. She wouldn't survive a day without my protection." Elara stood frozen in the shadows. The medication bottle felt heavy in her hand, a weight of wasted years and invisible labor. She didn't burst in, she didn't scream, she simply turned around and walked back to the elevator, her heels silent on the plush carpet. By the time she reached the penthouse, her hands were steady. She sat back down at her laptop. The Apex merger strategy, the one Julian needed to save his company from bankruptcy, was glowing on the screen. It was perfect. It was a masterpiece. Elara moved the cursor to the top right corner. She highlighted the entire folder. With one soft click, she hit delete. Then she emptied the trash. She closed the laptop and leaned back, watching the sunrise begin to bleed over Lake Michigan. Julian wanted to see what a blank page looked like. Now he was about to find out. The scent of expensive bourbon and Chloe's jasmine perfume still clung to Julian's jacket when he stumbled into the penthouse at 4 a.m. Elara was already awake, sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of herbal tea. She looked perfectly composed, her hair swept back into a neat low bun. Julian didn't notice the coldness in her eyes. He didn't even look at her face. He headed straight for his laptop bag. I need to check the Apex file one last time before the 9 a.m. board meeting. The investors are breathing down my neck, and if this merger doesn't go through, the board will have my head. Elara watched him open his laptop. She took a slow sip of her tea, the warmth of the porcelain grounding her. A moment of silence stretched through the kitchen. Then the sound of frantic clicking began. "What the?" he whispered. He tapped the keys harder. "Where is it? Elara, did you touch my laptop? The entire Apex folder is gone. The strategy, the projections, everything." Elara set her cup down with a soft clink. "I haven't touched your work, Julian. You always say I wouldn't understand those numbers anyway. Why would I be looking for them?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. He looked at her, his eyes darting with a mix of panic and suspicion. "Check the cloud. You're good at the technical stuff. Fix it." It was a command, not a request. Elara stood up and walked over to the screen. She looked at the empty desktop, the blank page he had mocked only hours earlier. "There's nothing here, Julian. It looks like the local files were deleted and the cloud sync was disabled. Maybe it was a server error at the office?" "A server error?" Julian slammed his hand on the marble counter. "I have 50 people in IT. How does $1 billion merger just vanish?" "I'm sure you'll figure it out," Elara said, her voice smooth and devoid of emotion. "You're the visionary, right? You see the numbers before they even exist." Julian froze. He looked at her, sensing a sharpness in her tone he hadn't heard in years, but his panic was too great to investigate. He grabbed his phone, shouting orders to his secretary as he sprinted toward the door. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't notice that Elara hadn't moved to help him. The moment the elevator doors closed, the supportive wife mask fell away. Elara walked to the bedroom and opened her closet. She pushed aside the soft, oversized sweaters and the floral dresses Julian liked her to wear. Hidden at the back was a garment bag she hadn't opened in 3 years. She unzipped it to reveal a sharp charcoal gray power suit. She spent the afternoon at a high-end salon in the Gold Coast. She didn't ask for a trim, she asked for a transformation. When she stepped out, her long hair was gone, replaced with a blunt, sophisticated bob that framed her face like a blade. She then went to a quiet, members-only club and opened a different laptop, one Julian didn't know about. She logged in to an encrypted portal. A message was waiting for her from an anonymous source. "The market is sensing blood in the water at Vance Global. The Apex deal is stalling. Is the ghost ready to move?" Elara's fingers hovered over the keys. For years she had built Julian's empire from the shadows, giving him the scripts to his own success, no more. She typed back, "The ghost is dead. Tell Silas Vane that V.E. Thorne is ready to talk." That evening, Elara returned to the penthouse. Julian was there, collapsed on the sofa with a bottle of scotch. He looked broken. The board meeting had been a disaster. Without the data-driven strategy Elara had written, he had been laughed out of the room by the lead investors. He looked up as she walked in, his eyes widening at her new hair and the tailored suit. "Elara, what did you do to yourself? And where have you been? I've been calling you for hours. I need you to help me reconstruct the projections." Elara didn't sit down. She stood over him, her shadow long and imposing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I was out, Julian, getting a head start on the future." "The future?" Julian laughed bitterly. "The company is falling apart. I need your brain, Elara. Just this once. Focus. Help me save Vance Global." Elara smiled. a small, chilling tilt of the lips. "I think you're mistaken, Julian. You told Choli I was a blank page, and the thing about blank pages is you never know what's going to be written on them next." Before he could respond, her phone chimed. It was an invitation to a private gala the following night, an event where Julian's biggest rival, Silas Vane, would be the guest of honor. Elara looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She didn't see the hidden architect anymore. She saw a predator. "By the way," she added, turning toward the bedroom, "I'm going out tomorrow night, alone. Don't wait up." The grand ballroom of the Art Institute of Chicago was a sea of black ties and silk gowns, but Elara felt like the only person in the room who could breathe. The air smelled of expensive lilies and cold champagne. For years, she had attended these events as a shadow, standing 3 paces behind Julian and nodding at jokes she didn't find funny. Tonight, she walked in alone. She wore the charcoal gray suit she had salvaged for her past. It was sharp, tailored to perfection, and radiated a quiet authority that caught the eyes of several investors before she even reached the bar. Julian was already there, huddled in a corner with a group of board members. Even from across the room, Elara could see the sweat on his brow. He was gesturing wildly, likely trying to explain away the technical glitch that had erased the Apex merger data. When he finally spotted her, his mid-sentence defense died in his throat. He excused himself and marched over, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Elara, what are you doing?" he hissed, grabbing her elbow. "You look like you're going to a board meeting, not a gala. And where have you been? I told you to stay home and work on those files." Elara didn't flinch. She looked down at his hand on her arm until he slowly let go, unsettled by her silence. "I told you, Julian, I'm starting on the future. And as for the files, I'm retired, remember? You told me the corporate world was too much for me." "This isn't the time for a tantrum," Julian snapped. "I'm losing the Apex deal. My reputation is on the line. If I don't find a way to pivot tonight, the board will start looking for a replacement by Monday." "Then you should probably start pivoting," Elara said. She picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and turned her back on Julian. She scanned the room until she saw him, Silas Vane. Silas was everything Julian was not. He was still, observant, and didn't feel the need to suck the oxygen out of every room he entered. He was the head of Vane Ventures and Julian's most formidable rival. He was also the only person in Chicago who had ever suspected that the genius behind Vance Global's strategy wasn't Julian at all. Elara walked straight up to him. "Mr. Vane, I believe you've been looking for V.E. Thorne." Silas turned, his dark eyes narrowing as they swept over her. A slow, respectful smile touched his lips. He didn't look at her like a sweet girl or a blank page. He looked at her like a chess player who had just realized his opponent was much more dangerous than he thought. "I expected a ghost to be harder to find," Silas said, his low baritone. "The ghost is taking a break," Elara replied, leaning in slightly. "But I have it on good authority that the Apex merger is currently a sinking ship, and I know exactly where the leaks are." For the next 20 minutes, Elara did something she hadn't done in years. She talked. She didn't use the simplified language she used for Julian. She spoke of market volatility, infrastructure vulnerabilities, and the exact data points that made Julian's current firm a liability. Silas listened, mesmerized. "You didn't just help him," Silas whispered, realization dawning on him. "You were the firm." Out of the corner of her eye, Elara saw Julian watching them. He looked baffled, then furious. He started to walk towards them, but Silas stepped forward, effectively shielding Elara from Julian's path. "Stay focused, Elara," Silas murmured. "If we do this, Julian won't just lose the deal, he'll lose the ground he stands on." "That's the plan," Elara said. Julian finally reached them, forcing a plastic smile. "Silas, I see you've met my wife. Elara, honey, we should go. You're clearly tired." Elara looked at Julian, then at Silas, and then back at the man she had spent a decade protecting. She felt a sudden, sharp clarity. "I'm not tired, Julian," she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby investors to hear. "In fact, I've never felt more awake. I think I'll stay. Silas and I have a lot to discuss regarding the future of the tech sector." Julian's face went pale. The dismissal in her voice was a public slap. Before he could respond, Elara's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was an encrypted alert from her home network. She glanced at the screen, and a small, satisfied smile played on her lips. The undermining had begun. "Julian," she said softly, "you might want to check your email. It looks like your lead architect has resigned, along with your head of finance." The morning light hitting the penthouse was cold and clinical. Usually, Elara would have Julian's coffee waiting and his suit steamed. Today, the kitchen was spotless and silent. Julian sat at the marble island, surrounded by 3 different phones and a mountain of printed emails. The arrogance that had defined him for a decade was beginning to crack, replaced by the frantic energy of a man drowning in shallow water. "They're gone, Elara," Julian rasped, not looking up. "My lead architect, my CFO, even the head of data, they all resigned overnight. No notice, no explanations. It's like a coordinated strike." Elara walked into the kitchen, wearing a perfectly tailored white blazer. She poured herself a glass of water, her movements fluid and deliberate. Talented people usually know when a ship is taking on water. You can't expect them to drown with you. Julian finally looked at her, his eyes red-shot. "The Apex investors pulled out an hour ago. They said the intellectual soul of the project was missing. What does that even mean? I'm the soul. I'm the face of this company." "A face is nothing without a brain," Elara said softly. She didn't wait for his response. She picked up her slim leather briefcase, something he hadn't seen her use in years. Julian stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "Where are you going? I need you here. I need you to go into the server logs and find those missing files. I know they're tucked away in some backup you created." Elara stopped at the door, her hand resting on the handle. "I don't work for you, Julian. I never did. I worked for a marriage that didn't exist. You should probably head to the office. I hear the board of directors is calling an emergency session." An hour later, Elara was in a glass-walled office in the West Loop. It was sleek, minimalist, and bore no name on the door, only a small gold plaque that read "Thorn and Vane." Silas Vane was waiting for her, standing by a window that overlooked the Chicago River. "The market is in a frenzy," Silas said, turning to her with a look of genuine admiration. "Vance Global stock is plummeting. Every move you predicted is happening in real time. You're dismantling him without even touching a keyboard." "I'm not dismantling him, Silas. I'm just withdrawing the support he didn't realize he had. A house doesn't need to be pushed to fall if you remove the foundation." Silas sat across from her, sliding a tablet over. "We've successfully acquired the contracts Julian lost this morning. The investors don't want Julian's charisma anymore. They want the ghost's precision. Are you ready to step out of the shadows?" "Not yet," Elara said, her voice calm and steady. "I want him to feel the full weight of his own incompetence first. I want him to realize that the blank page he mocked is the only reason he ever had a story to tell." As the afternoon progressed, the news reached them. Julian had become erratic. He was reportedly screaming at his remaining staff, accusing them of being spies for a phantom competitor. He couldn't answer the board's questions about the company's missing strategy, and the rumors of a hostile takeover were starting to circulate. Elara watched the flickering stock ticker on her screen. She felt no guilt, only a profound sense of equilibrium. For years, she had been the silent engine. Now she was the driver. Her phone buzzed. It was a frantic, desperate text from Julian. "Elara, please, I'm at the office. The board is talking about a vote of no confidence. I need you to come down here and help me explain the data. I'll give you anything. Just fix this." Elara deleted the message and looked up at Silas. "He's desperate," Silas noted, watching her expression. "Desperation makes people predictable," Elara said. "He's going to call a final board meeting to announce a savior investor to stop the takeover. He'll try to bluff his way through one last time." She stood up, smoothing her blazer. "And that is when I'll show him exactly what I've been writing while he was working late." The boardroom of Vance Global felt like a courtroom where the sentence had already been passed, even if Julian didn't know it. A heavy silence hung over the long mahogany table, broken only by the nervous tapping of a board member's pen. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline was draped in an aggressive midday sun, reflecting off the glass towers like polished armor. Julian stood at the head of the table, adjusting his silk tie. He had managed to find a spark of his old bravado, though his eyes were hollow. "Gentlemen, I know the last week has been volatile, but as I've always said, a true leader is defined by how he handles the storm. I'm pleased to announce that a private equity firm has stepped in to provide the capital necessary to stop this hostile takeover. We aren't just surviving, we're being reborn." The board members exchanged skeptical glances. "And who is this savior, Julian? The market says you're a sinking ship. Why would anyone buy in now?" Julian smirked, the shadow of his former arrogance returning. "They're not buying in because of the current numbers. They're buying in because of me. The investor is waiting in the lobby. I've invited them up to sign the final papers and put a leash on whoever has been trying to sink us." He looked at his watch, then at the heavy double doors. "They should be here any second." Right on cue, the doors swung open. The room went still. It wasn't a corporate shark in a pinstriped suit. It was Elara. She moved with a grace that was almost predatory, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the marble floor. She wore a deep navy power suit that looked like it had been forged rather than sewn. Behind her, Silas Vane carried a slim leather portfolio. Julian's smirk didn't just fade, it disintegrated. He actually let out a short, confused laugh. "Elara, what are you doing? This is a closed session. Did you bring my lunch? I told you I'd be home late." Elara didn't stop until she reached the opposite end of the long table. She didn't look at the board. She looked directly at Julian. Her expression was as calm as the surface of a deep lake. "I didn't bring your lunch, Julian," she said, her voice echoing with a clarity that made several board members sit up straighter. "I brought your termination papers." Julian's face went through 3 different shades of pale. "That's impossible. Don't be ridiculous. Silas, why are you with my wife?" "She isn't just your wife, Julian," Silas said, stepping forward and placing the portfolio on the table. "She is the managing director of Thorne and Vane, and as of 20 minutes ago, she's the majority shareholder of the firm that just acquired every outstanding share of Vance Global." The room erupted into whispers. Julian gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You don't have that kind of anything. You're a housewife, Elara. You're a blank page." Elara leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. "You kept asking who the ghost was, Julian. The one who wrote your speeches, the one who fixed your data, the one who built the very foundation you're standing on." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Look at me. I'm the woman you told was too weak to survive the real world, but the truth is, you've been living in my world for a decade. I just decided to stop letting you stay here for free." She slid a single document across the polished wood. It was a formal notice of removal. "Without me, Julian, you're just a man in an expensive suit who can't do long division. You're fired.
Security is waiting downstairs to escort you out. I suggest you take your jasmine-scented memories with you." Julian looked around the room, searching for an ally, but every board member was looking at Elara with a mixture of fear and profound respect. They saw the shift in power. They saw the real architect. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked smaller than he'd ever had. He gathered his pride, which was now a ragged, threadbare thing, and walked out of the room without looking back. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a beginning. An hour later, the boardroom was empty except for Elara and Silas. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the office that was now hers. Silas poured 2 glasses of sparkling water and handed one to her. "To the new CEO," he said softly. Elara walked to the window, looking out over the city she had helped build from the shadows. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a supporting character. She didn't feel like an invisible architect. She looked at her reflection in the glass. Her eyes were bright, her posture was perfect, and her future was hers to write. "No more ghosts," Elara whispered to her reflection. "From now on, I'm the one signing the name." She took a sip of her drink, the cold water sharp and refreshing, and began to plan her first real day of work.